Hi, welcome to part 32 on the Lackawanna Cut-Off. We're going to get a tour of the Stroudsburg signal tower. Hi, I'm Chuck Walsh, and we're here in East Stroudsburg. Technically, we're here in East Stroudsburg, and we're going to get a tour of the tower by Kendrick Bisset, who is a historian and he's an expert on towers, and well, he's an expert on this tower. So let's take a walk over and let's go climb up onto the tower.
Welcome. Welcome to the East Stroudsburg Tower. You know you're not supposed to be here. The rules say that unauthorized people are not allowed in. However, since we're not in service, welcome, and I'll show you what we've got. The elephant in the room, of course, is this, what's known as an interlocking machine. And as part of its duties, it was used to control switches and signals in an area from down here to up here on the model board. This is where the signal bridge crosses the tracks to our north, and this is where the track wiggles to the south. When the railroad was built in 1867 through here, there was essentially no signaling at all. A new president arrived in 1899, and he decided that the railroad needed to have proper signal protection, which would allow the trains to move faster and closer together. Part of that effort is associated with what this machine does. When you're operating with manual switches, the train crew has to get off the train, throw the switch, the train goes past, the crew has to get back on the train, which means it has to stop again. So it's a pretty slow operation. The idea behind this was to centralize the control of the switches. It also controls the signals that tells which train to go when. So the operation is, we throw, for example, a switch. Now, why is the lever so long? The switch was operated mechanically, directly with a pipe. There was nothing in the pipe. All of the force to operate the switch came from the muscles that you need, that you had to apply to the lever. These were known as Armstrong machines. And to help the operator remember what was what on the machine, they're color-coded. So black is for a switch. Blue is for a lock. Red is for a signal. Yellow are the two levers that control the crossing gates here. And white are now spare. When this tower was installed in 1908, there were no spare levers. No signal engineer worth his salt would do that. But there were extenuating circumstances that they had to add some stuff, and that was the only way they could do it. So, we've thrown the switch. Now, and this switch would allow a train to cross from track 4 to track 2 through here. So, you pull the lock lever. Not only this now, when the switch through, there's a rod with 2 holes in it. When you move the lock lever, it pokes a rod into one of those 2 holes to lock the switch out in the track. That will make sure that the switch isn't going to move from where you asked for it to move. Not only does it lock the switch in the track, but it locks the lever too. So we can't move this controlling lever. So we have now thrown and locked the crossover to allow a train to cross over from track 4 to track 2. Now we clear the signal, which happens to be this signal down here, signal number 1. Can't move it. The reason is we've thrown and locked this crossover in the reverse position. This crossover is already in the normal position, the correct position for us, but we didn't lock it. So we lock it. And now the signal lever can be moved, causing the signal to clear. Once we've done that, it locks the lock levers and, of course, locks the appropriate switch levers in the proper position. Thus, we have a safe route for the train to move through the interlocking. That's the entire purpose of this monster machine. The technique was developed in the 1880s. A number of improvements over the years, both before and after this tower was installed. In 1914, there were well over 4,000 mechanical type interlocking machines around the country. Today there are none. They're all gone. All the mechanical plants have closed. Many of those got replaced by, first off, many of them were replaced when the track got torn up, closed when the track got torn up. But this machine, which was installed in 1943, I think, this machine replaced a couple of interlocking machines like this one. On this one, to throw the switch, you flip a lever like that. To clear a signal, you flip a lever like that. You push the start button down here, and it sends out a code to a relay house out in the field. And using relays, like that one, all of the locking is taken care of electrically and all in power. The switch operates with an electric motor. Originally, when built, this plant had semaphore signals. Semaphore signals have an arm that sticks out from your perspective like this, and would clear by dropping down. In 1937, they were replaced with color light signals, similar to your traffic lights today. And so the operation didn't require as many levers. In many cases, or in some cases, the signal had as many as 3 arms on it. It took 1 lever for each arm. And when they went to a color light, they could figure out which arm, if you will, was supposed to clear electrically. So it only required 1 lever, and hence a number of these levers became spare. One of the levers, you will note, is colored both black and blue. Turns out that there used to be a pipe-connected crossover way down near the south end of the plant, about 1,100 feet away from the tower. That was a very long pipe run. A, difficult to maintain. B, very difficult to operate, especially in winter. One of the earlier changes after they went to the color light signals was they changed it to 1 lever for each switch of the crossover, plus a 3rd lever for locking both. A few years later, they decided to put in a power switch machine. The power switch machine, that is with an electric motor, has linkages inside the machine so that it will both throw and lock the switch. So that's why it's painted black and blue. The tower was manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I say manned because I know of very, very few women tower operators. There are 3 lockers up here for the 3 regular trick operators. And other tricks were, trick being an 8-hour shift, were taken care of by an extra board, so-called. Also, you didn't want to leave the tower if you could help it, and so they provided a toilet over here in the corner so that the operator didn't have to go very far and be out of touch. Now, this is obviously the big part of the most obvious part of his duties. But there were other duties as well. The tower operator had to obtain information as to what trains were going to be coming. And he'd do that by just talking to the dispatcher, who in our case was in Scranton. And he would use the telephone, and he would talk to the dispatcher and get a lineup, as it was called. This is the telephone he used. Notice it has a headset. The idea is you put the headset on, you can now talk and listen and have both hands free to write, because part of what he had to do was write train orders. Train order was the way you communicated back in the day with the train crew. And the train crew, the operator would copy a train order, the dispatcher would dictate it, he would copy it. He had to make at least 3 copies, oftentimes more. One for himself, one for the engineer, and one for the conductor. When he copied it, after he's done, he would read the whole train order back to the dispatcher. If he had it correct, the dispatcher would say, okay, give his okay, and then the time would go down on it. Then the operator would tie the train order onto the train order hoop. And hold this up for the train as the train was coming past. The engineer, you had to have 2 of these, by the way. One for the engineer and one for the conductor. The engineer, or more often the fireman or brakeman, would put his hand out of the cab, poke his hand through the loop here, and pop the string off with a train order tied to it. So we're passing up orders. Since this was a double-track railroad, orders were not terribly common, although we do have a number of copies of train orders that were issued here, many of them saying such things as there's a speed limit, temporary speed limit between here and there. The operator also had to record the passing time of every train. And in the case of toward the end of the operation here, where there were several locations where the train would pass, he had to record the time at each one. And then he would report that to the train dispatcher. As part of our work here at the tower, we've been sort of paying attention to some of the things that don't look really very nice. And one of them is this desk. And you can see that the desk drawers are very badly worn, and people were saying, well, gee, we ought to really fix that. Except, we were thinking about it and realized how many feet must have rested on that drawer over the years. So we decided, no, we're not going to change it. So the tower remained in service, as far as we know, until around about 1986. Of course, by that time there was not an awful lot of traffic. There had been a number of changes besides going to the color light signals. The crossing gates were still manually operated right up to the end. Some of the people who have visited the tower turned out to be former tower operators. And they gave some interesting stories. One that I particularly like is that the gates, there were 4 gates on each corner of the crossing with the tracks. And the gates would come down and meet very near the center of the street. And the gates had a little pole which would hold the gate at the proper level by hitting the street. And this tower operator says he hated working during the day because people just wouldn't pay much attention to when he started pulling the gates down. And more than once that rod went through the hood of a car. A word about the position of the levers. These 4 levers are in the reverse position. Those levers are all normal, according to the signal engineer. Or according to the signal design. However, if you look at the pictures of the tower, when it was in service, you will note this is what you will see. Because these levers are usually left reverse so that the switches are locked in case some train comes sailing along and goes through the signal. So the switch is going to be properly locked and safe for the train to go over it. Not necessarily safe for where the train is going to end up, but at least the switch isn't going to cause the train to derail. So the signal engineer is very careful to talk about normal and usual. They do not mean the same to the signal engineer, as we call them jelly jars. When the train goes past, when you have cleared a signal and the train is coming up toward the signal and you decide that you don't want that train to go, you want to let some other train go that's in conflict with it, you can put the signal lever back to the stop position, and with only mechanical locking, you can go ahead and change the switch. And for example, for number 14, over here, train coming up to the signal number 1 cleared, and he looks up, and all of a sudden signal number 1 goes to red, and he goes, oh darn. And the towerman throws the switch, and the train can't stop, and he goes sailing through the switch and ends up crossing Interlocking Street when there's no track, because track 4 ends just before the street. So in order to prevent that, they added electric locking, which is the boxes behind the levers. And if a train does not go past the signal before you've put the signal lever back, you have to run time. You're not going to get the video of the entire time running because it's a couple of 3 minutes at least. The idea is that this until that time has expired, you can't put the lever the signal lever full normal. And hence the route is still locked and safe for that train, even if he does blow the signal. So this will give the train time to stop, or if it doesn't stop, he goes past the signal and steps on the detector track circuit that will also lock the switch, and so you're safe. And by the way, I can't hurry it up. Once I've got it started, it has to run, or I can stop it and wind it back up again, but you can't hurry the time. One of the interesting features about this machine is that it's made by the Johnson Railroad Signal Company, Rahway, New Jersey. That company was not in existence in 1908. It folded in 1890 something. But the Union Switch and Signal Company, one of the major manufacturers, ended up buying their patterns and their patents, and so they were able to supply this machine. It's a strange design. Doesn't look it, but like all of the other interlocking machines of this type, of that era, the levers came in, the frame came in 4 and 8 lever sections. So, okay, you want a 24 lever machine, 3 8 lever pieces, and off you go. You can't get 38 levers out of 4 and 8 lever pieces. 36, yes. 38, no. The Johnson machine was unusual in that you could add a lever on either end. And that's what's happened here. And that's why we've had 38 working levers and no spares.
Why do certain levers have a spring and some don't?
They are supposed to all have springs. And the parts are in there. in that bin over there. Part of the problem, and that's part of a problem we have, is that, for example, this lever, well, that's not too bad, because that one does clear. But people will try pulling the lever, and you can see it's going to bust the vertical rod. These are obviously also missing the latch.
And why do some of the levers have these boxes behind them and some of them don't?
The boxes behind them are mostly electric locks. And in fact, you can see the way it works here. When you try moving the lever, I don't know if this one will work. I can't, oh, of course, I have to lock a switch to do it. When I pull the lever, it tries to rotate this, and there's a notch in the disc. And actually, this one would prevent it from going to where it is now. It's an electric lock with circuit controller so that the electric circuits know which way the lever is. And it's used with a timer to lock signal levers in their non-normal position. And they're used also on the lock levers to lock them in the reverse position if there's a train on them, so you can't unlock the switch. Some of the levers didn't need the electric lock, and so they were omitted. I suspect that the electric locking was added later, but not much, because this design electric lock became obsolete about 1910.
Now in the movie, the train, and this is a European type of situation I'm talking about, the tower there, you see when they operate the levers that they also, there's a foot pedal that they have to press down.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you would see commonly in the U.S. or what kind of situation, or is that a European thing? Or
It's mostly European, but there were electric. They did put that when they had an electric lock on the lever, that you would have to press the foot switch to release, to allow the electric lock to pick up. On this one, they used one of the contacts in the bar to figure out what the position was. Actually, if you want to get a little bit of that, you can come down here. Here is one that works. This is on the lock lever. And you can see when I... By the way, the other weird thing is, notice I've pulled this up to just clear. Notice that rotated the disc on the lock counterclockwise. When I come over to the end, notice it hasn't moved at all. When I come over to the end and finish, it moves it further counterclockwise. Now what we've done here is we've cheated and broken the rules terribly by sticking the lock up with a little piece of popsicle stick. Now, that's in the lock position. That is, the lock is de-energized. And now I can't pull the lever, can't pull the latch far enough to clear, so I can't unlock the switch. And that's how it would work if there was a train sitting on the switch. So, since we don't have the electric locks, the electricity working, I pick it up with a popsicle stick wedged in there.
is it true that the pedestrian gates still operate?
Yes.
Could
Well,
you,
it's
is
not,
it,
it's not a really a pedestrian gate. It's a short remainder of the original gate, because originally that gate did go all the way across the street, or halfway across, and there was another one on the other side. First one to make sure there's no people involved. I did knock the head. There's the gate down, and if you swing around with the camera, you can see the lever reversed. Now, I dare you to try and put it back. It will pull you into the machine because it's heavy.
so what do I do?
I pull the latch.
Pull latch.
Make sure you pull the lever a little bit to take tension off. There you
Okay.
go.
Right?
Yep.
And, okay,
Oh, yes.
it's coming up, okay. I'm trying to be,
Appreciate being gentle. Yes.
you're right, it has quite a,
Now you're only operating one gate, and a short one at that. That
So
used
really
to
one.
operate two of them that went halfway across the street, what, 20 feet on each side? So, yes.
So basically, if you weren't prepared for that, you're going to go flying into the machine. Okay.
Actually, in my professional career, I was able to visit a tower, a mechanical tower, and the tower operator asked me if I'd ever operated a mechanical lever. I said, no, I haven't. He says, well, here. And he went up to a lever and he pulled it, then he put it back and he says, now you try. And I got up on there with my feet on either side, and I pulled for all I was worth. I had the latch up and everything. I could not budge that lever. He had just operated it, so I knew it worked. So then he says, well, okay, that one is a little stiff. Why don't you try this one? And he pointed me to another lever, and I pulled up on the lever latch. I got myself all ready and gave it a mighty heave. I came over like that and I practically went out the window. It had been converted to power operation, so there was nothing connected to it other than electrical contacts. I'm sure more than one person got exactly that same tale.
Now, some towers, I know in a previous video we talked to Artie Erdman, who worked for the Erie Lackawanna, and he was qualified on a tower in controlled part of Hoboken Yard, and that machine had over
150
200 levers associated with it. Didn't look like this, but much more complicated. I mean, this is complicated enough, but I mean, imagine talking about a machine that we're talking about literally hundreds of, well, a combination of switches and signals and such.
Yes. There were, some towers had well over 100 levers, and in many cases they would have a director and several levermen. So Leverman A would handle levers 1 through 50 or something, and B would go 50 to 100 and so forth. And the director would tell them which levers to pull and in what order.
Okay.
To accommodate whatever the traffic was looking for. But yes, there were some pretty big interlockings. Most of those were power operated, and hence didn't have levers anywhere near as big as this. But many of them, in fact, it was into the 50s that you could still get a mechanical interlocking machine if you really wanted it.
Some leftovers, perhaps. Speaking to the operation here, Stroudsburg, technically East Stroudsburg, but Stroudsburg, according to the
Actually,
railroad.
technically Stroudsburg, but the railroad always called it Stroudsburg, not
Yeah.
East Stroudsburg.
Right, but it actually is East Stroudsburg, where
Correct.
they're physically located. They actually, and you probably are probably aware of this, but in Hoboken, they actually had I guess a 2-digit code or something that they could press, and they could basically call directly here. I don't know if that's where it would come in. And for example, reference Artie Erdman again, he said he'd get Joe Paradise on the phone, and sometimes you get it where Joe would say, "Can't talk to you, I'm taking care of the gates," or something to that effect. "I'm on the gates." In other words, the gates are where the train's coming, he has to put the gates down, and he can't be conversing about other things unless they're, very relevant to what he's doing.
That's Joe Paradise.
That's Joe Parrott.
We've got pictures of him
Wow.
working in this tower.
Okay.
Yes, there was a pretty good communication system. There was a speaker up here, which you can see in some of these pictures, some of these photographs we have. But there was a speaker on the CTC machine. There. And it was actually a fairly sophisticated telephone system, but one of the issues was that there were a number of locations on the line at the same time. So everybody had a push-to-talk button on the floor to operate the foot.
So it was like a party line almost?
Yes, it was definitely a party line, especially the dispatchers line.
Now, for people who don't know what a party line is basically you could literally have multiple parties, people at different phone numbers talking to each other if they picked up the phone.
Exactly. There were 8, 10, 15 phones on the line. Anybody could hear what was going on.
They could eavesdrop if they wanted to, yes.
But you couldn't, if everybody tried talking at the same time, you wouldn't be able to hear any of them. And that's
Which on a railroad, I guess, isn't so much an issue because in a sense everybody is sort of, in a sense, invested in what's going on. But on a personal phone, that could lead to other issues. But
yes, one of my favorite stories that Steve McAvoy tells about in his book is how they would talk to the dispatcher all the time. They ended up getting to know the dispatchers pretty well, and the dispatchers got to know the operators pretty well. And years after he left the railroad, Steve went to work for a consulting firm. And as part of his work studying traffic for a proposed signal change, he visited the towers that he used to operate at. And he was sitting there talking to one of the operators, and the operator, the dispatcher called one of the other stations, and Steve said, "Oh, is that, I don't remember the name, is that Bill?" And the operator said, "Yeah, that's Bill." "Oh. Can I go on and can I call the dispatcher?" He says, "Sure." And the way they would do it is they would press their foot switch and talk and tell them who is calling. That's all they would say. Attleboro. The dispatcher came back and said, "Say again?" "Attleboro." "One more time, please." "Attleboro." "McAvoy, I thought you were going to get a real job." The dispatcher recognized it just from saying Attleboro.
And these guys didn't necessarily ever meet in person.
No, exactly. They wouldn't meet in person. They never saw each other. Unless they went to some company gathering someplace. And, "Oh, you're..." But in general, no, they would never see each other.
Because they were located at different parts of the railroad, and there was never necessarily any need for them ever to meet face to face.
Exactly. And the communication, as you were saying, is this phone would have, or the speaker would have been on the dispatcher side. There was that box was set up so that he could plug into a circuit talking to, for example, Slateford Junction in that direction, or Interlocking or Gravel Place in that direction.
Which had towers at one time that operated.
Yes, so he could talk to the tower operators at adjacent locations. I would presume he could also plug in and talk to the agent in the station back when the station was active. So they had a fairly comprehensive communication system, as well as a city phone, as they called it, a regular dial telephone.
Now, have you talked at all about how they heated these towers?
Mm-hmm.
'Cause obviously, it didn't have air conditioning, at least not maybe until much later. But
Yes.
it could get pretty cold, I imagine.
Oh, indeed. When this was built, there were a large number of railroad offices here in town. There was a freight office, an express office, there was a freight house just the other side of Bridge Street. There was team track where they would park boxcars and people would come with their horse teams, that's the name, to unload the cars. So there was quite a number of facilities around here. So they had a central boiler, a central heating plant with steam lines running up here. That was closed somewhere in the 40s, and presumably at that time we got our own boiler downstairs for the steam heat, with 2 radiators up here and some pipe radiators downstairs. I'll bet you it was still pretty chilly when it got really cold. I mean, these windows are not tight.
Yeah, because I've heard of stories of other towers where they actually had a furnace. In cases might have been a cold furnace or such, and if for some reason the fire went out, or at the end of one trick going to the other, it had gone out, and you got to build a fire, and you may have trains you have to deal with, and until the fire gets going, it could be pretty chilly.
Yes, well, that was the case here. It was a coal-fired furnace.
Oh, okay.
And there's a door, or at least was, I think there's a door on the analomic side, a little door about that big, where the coal company could drop a chute in, drop the coal down into the coal bin, which is down in the corner now. So that was how it heated, but the radiators, I'm sure, were the same as what were originally installed.
So the rest of the year they'd be opening the windows, because I imagine it can get pretty hot in here.
It can. So you want to take a trip downstairs and we'll... Pulling 13. Okay, here goes one again. Should move part way. This is lever, the lead out for lever 13. And you can see the crank is angled this way. I'm going to go back upstairs. That means that the switch is locked. I'm going to go back upstairs and put it back normal, release the locking, and then I'm going to pull lever 14, which will be either this one or this one, I'm not sure which. And that one will then angle, the crank on the bottom will angle that way, and then I'll pull 13 again to lock the switch again. Putting 13 back.
So, I hope you enjoyed that. A lot of information about the tower here at Stroudsburg. Hope you look forward to our next video. Part 33 on the Lackawanna Cut-Off.